So, hello and welcome back to the HR Dive podcast. For the next 12 minutes, I have Samantha Brook with me, who up until very recently was the Group Head of Resources Director for Severfield. However, she also has 25 years of HR experience in heavy industry, including structured steel, energy, and chemicals. She has led people through strategy in complex, unionized, acquisition-driven environments, from power stations to construction sites, navigating skills shortages, culture integration, and generational shifts in some of the UK's most traditional sectors. So, Samantha, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to it.
I want to kind of focus on a bit of doom and gloom, I suppose, actually, first of all. Sort of in steel fabrication, construction, what is sort of the most painful people challenge right now? Is it skill shortages, retention, generational shift? Is it something else entirely? What does that really look like on the ground?
Yeah. Well, I think probably the most challenging one is skills. I would say skills shortages, but I think an element of that is wrapped up into the generational shift, is wrapped up into an aging workforce. I think
Mm.
what we're seeing is a workplace where sort of expectations haven't kind of caught up with modern reality.
Hmm.
So you've got in that an attraction issue. The jobs are there and the mechanisms to develop the skills are there, but people have got to want those jobs. So I think we've got some brilliant people in manufacturing and construction, but the system is it's just assuming that the next generation are going to tolerate what the previous generation tolerated. And
Mm.
that's not the case. So when it comes to working hours, flexibility, you've got to start thinking differently. So I think that it's coming out as a skills challenge, but there's all of that wrapped around it in the background. Um,
Yeah.
in terms of how that's playing out, and in particular in the industry, the construction industry I was just in, it was very much around needing to look overseas to find those skills where they did exist, but also looking at automation and looking at where you could do that where it was possible. And that was never about replacing existing workers. It was always about looking where we could fill the gaps for where we couldn't find the workers. So yeah, a whole host of challenges there around the way the workplace is set up, really.
Mm. And I guess sort of part of that setup is also engagement, I suppose. So the question there for you really is, when you have a majority of your workforce that is deskless, that are on site or they're working factory shifts, sometimes without access to laptops, desktops, that sort of stuff. How do you find what is your best practice when it comes to sort of communicating and engaging effectively without, I guess, encroaching on personal time as well?
Yeah, it's a really good question, that, because it is a real chicken and egg situation, that kind of encroaching on personal time piece. I think you've got to start with respect. If you've not got respect and that engagement is relying on people doing stuff in their own time on their own devices, then that's not a great place to start. I think an engaged colleague, absolutely. If you've got somebody who's fully engaged, they're going to connect, they're going to do training out time because they're already engaged. But it's that chicken and egg piece. You've got to get them there first. So I mean, for us, it was very much around, and we didn't always get it right, looking at traditional channels that you've got. So your toolbox talks, your kind of shift briefings, your handovers, your town halls, your more traditional kind of mechanisms and channels for communication.
Mm.
But I think where we probably should have done more and probably are starting to look at doing more is they tend to be very safety, business results focused kind of
Mm.
communication. And actually there's so much more content you could be using those channels for. So it's how do you engage people through broader content? And I think once you've built that engagement and really learned what people are engaging with, you can build your digital channels on top then. So it's kind of people can then opt into those as they want. So but
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose in a way, kind of starting broad actually allows you to create higher engagement on the narrow stuff, the things that really matter. So
yeah.
when you're pushing safety communications, if you've cultivated a culture and an engaged workforce that trusts you and want to see and sort of engage with you, then you're going to get more engagement on that safety piece anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I think a lot of the heavy industries that I've worked in, that safety piece is done really, really, really well.
Mm.
And it's a license to operate, and that's kind of where all the communication focuses with these groups. And actually, you can do so much more and use these channels for so many other things, be that local community things you're communicating, what's going on in the rest of the business, development, other opportunities. So there's all sorts of things we could be using those channels for that probably businesses aren't.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, and I've read before that you sort of led the HR function through acquisition and merger environments. So,
Just a
question
few.
there really for you, just a few, yeah. When it, that's obviously clearly a unique HR challenge, let's say. So, what is some of the advice that you would give to sort of lead that change practically?
Yeah, I think mergers and acquisitions are always an interesting one because there's particularly in listed environments that need to move quick. A 100-day plan. We've integrated and everything's great. That's never the case. That is just a communication spin, if you like, at that point. And I think a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and even from my own experience, they fail because you rush to integrate without understanding what it is you're integrating. So I think you get a good view of a business through due diligence, but it's one view of the business. It's not the warts and all view of the business. It's not the way it's done on the ground, and therefore I think you kind of, if you're not careful, you miss a lot. So yeah, I think communication. Oh my God, communication is so key, and you fall back into the day job. It's easy to fall back into the day job after you've done the ta-da, welcome everybody. First 30 days, you fall into the day job and you forget to communicate. So you've got to over communicate. If there's any guidance and advice, it is over communicate. But also, I think clarity. There's always going to be some red lines, be that safety standards, be that a job grading hierarchy, be that decision making rights. There's going to be red lines, and one side of that merger and acquisition is going to have to adapt. And I think you've got to be really clear and really firm on what those red lines are. So I think they're kind of really important ones.
Yeah.
And it's that communication. I think people don't resist change, be that a merger, be that organizational change, any kind of organizational development. They don't resist change. They resist confusion and they resist loss of control. So I think communication and absolute clarity are key.
Yeah. And I guess quick sort of flip side of the question, what's something that leaders get wrong during that change?
Oh, good one. Yeah, underestimating the power of the legacy culture. This runs deep, and yeah, I think, and I've also fallen foul to this time. You don't give it enough credit. So I think underestimating that legacy culture is probably the biggest thing.
Yeah, that's a great take, actually.
Yeah, I think you've just got to get in there and you've got to listen and really listen, and then try and fix some quick things, find some quick wins, but be realistic. And like I say, it's back to that 100-day ta-da, we've integrated piece. Be realistic. Your culture is going to embed and change through thousands of decisions that are being made every day, not some fancy plan in a PowerPoint. So I think it's be realistic.
Yeah. Okay, so final question from me then, really. Thinking future generations, let's say, in industries where sort of long hours have been, I guess, historically the commitment, let's be honest, how should we encourage leaders to rethink the concept of, I guess, performance and loyalty in an effort to sort of retain and attract that younger generation without necessarily lowering productivity standards?
I love the topic of kind of intergenerational workforce, and it comes back a little bit to what I said at the start around the fact that we're kind of just assuming that the system is kind of not adapting and changing, and it's going to stick. So in terms of attracting and kind of really engaging, it's about, I think, measuring output, not hours. I think is absolutely key. Making progression visible, making it fair, and ensuring managers can have actual adult conversations about performance with their people. I think what we're seeing is we've got a real disconnect in the workforce now, where you've got Gen Z coming through from education where they've been taught about the growth mindset, but they're being managed by a generation who've worked hard, put in the time, put in the hours, earned the stripes, and that's how they've progressed. So you've got this fundamental disconnect about development and how development should happen. So Gen Z's requests are being seen as kind of impatient or entitled. And they're interpreting the more traditional ways of earning your stripes as just a lack of investment in their growth. So there's a real friction going on there. So for me, for workplaces to really retain those younger generations, we've got to be super clear about where the bar is, what that bar looks like, and making sure we've got managers who are capable of developing and having those proper conversations around development. And it's not just time served.
Yeah, amazing. Samantha, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
It's been good. Thank you.